I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundagara land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Colby. Thanks for joining me.
Well, you're welcome, Sam. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you for making the time zone work.
Yeah, we are in opposite times at the moment, and
Yeah,
typically
yeah.
most people, it's very obvious as an Aussie host, people notice the accent difference. So, where in the world are you at the moment?
I am, you know what? I almost said San Diego because that's where I've been for 12 years, but I recently moved to Portland, Oregon, which,
Oh,
depending on who your primary demographic is, that literally could mean nothing. But let's just say this, I'm on the west coast of the United States of America.
right. Okay.
Yes.
I do have a good chunk of US followers and listeners, so they will probably have far more context as to
Oh,
where that is.
well, hello, good chunk. It's nice to meet you.
Yes. So I mean, most people are going to know you as the author of Unclobber and
Yep.
as like the famous straight white male pastor who is queer affirming, who never really needed to be, particularly. And so um I absolutely want to talk about the book at some point, and I'm sure that that will come up. But I like to start these episodes with a super duper vague question, so that you can start
Super
off.
duper vague.
Yeah,
This isn't
super
just
duper
this
vague.
isn't just vague. It's not
Yeah,
even super
yeah,
vague. This is super I'm so excited for
yes.
what qualifies for that level of vagueness. Let's go. I'm
Yes.
ready.
And also because I like to start it wherever you feel necessary to start for context, because as we know, context matters. So where does your story start?
Wait, that's the super duper vague
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Where does my story start? Wow. So it was a cold November night, 1981, and my mom and my dad. No, I'm just kidding. I tried to do the quick math
Yeah.
of like, what's June minus 9 months? Okay. Anyway.
I was like, that
Where?
was very quick math, unless you just
Okay.
had that ready to go.
Yeah, no, I've thought about that night a lot. No, I'm just kidding. God, that got you said anything goes, and I don't know if we were going to talk about parental conception of where we came from.
I mean,
That's part of that.
to be fair, I've talked about weirder shit, so
This is
let's
this
go with
is
it.
this is why people tune in. This is what they're here for. Okay, where does my story start? Here, here's how I'll frame it. I'll say this. I often start off my events or my lectures or my sermons by saying, "Hi, my name is Colby, and I'm a recovering Baptist."
Right.
And that usually gets a few chuckles from the crowd, or a few people will walk out at that point. I'm like, "All right, cool. I have thinned the herd. I know who I'm dealing with here."
Yeah.
And so I start there because I was born and raised into a family that came from a long line of very conservative Baptist heritage. And so growing up in our family, it wasn't uncommon for us to be in church 47 times a week. When you start adding up Bible studies and choir practices and youth groups and Sunday schools and all the different services and the elders meetings. And so that was my normal rhythm um, growing up. And that shifted a little bit when my parents got a divorce when I was around 8, 9, or 10. years old. And so my mom then took my brothers and me into a more kind of generic evangelical world. Because this might come as a shock to your audience, but the Baptists back in the mid to late 80s weren't super um, uh, uh, well attuned to how to deal with divorced people. Like it was still a world of like, oh no, shame.
Yeah.
And so my mom, I think, just kind of felt really awkward being at the church that her and my dad had been at for so long. So we found our way into an evangelical world. And in the book on Clobber, I kind of unpack this story a bit more, but the highlights are is that I ended up having an experience that led me to want to become a pastor, and because I had come from a Baptist evangelical world, that was just where I proceeded to go for my education and my training and became a pastor. And so really, while now I look back and I say I've been a pastor for 22-ish years,
Mhm.
I will say that the first decade of that was in conservative evangelical spaces.
Yeah.
And then the last dozen or so years have now been what you could call post-evangelical or progressive Christian
Yeah.
spaces. And so there's a bit of situating me for the sake of those who have no idea who I am, which is going to
Yeah.
be 97% of the people listening to this podcast.
I'm not sure it will be quite that high, but
93, 93. All right, 93.
I mean, I think actually, come to think of it, I think you might actually be the first actual living, breathing, active pastor that I've had on the show. I've had ex-pastors and I've had people who fall in like
You've
a
evidently had dead
not dead
pastors.
pastors, but living,
I'm
breathing,
the
just
first living,
seemed.
breathing. I've had a couple corpses. I had a
Yeah,
jar of ashes that one time
yeah.
just sat there and listened
Yeah.
to me.
I mean, I've had a couple of people where they probably would say that their role as a pastor was dead. So, like, it
Sure,
probably
sure,
would
sure.
work for
Yeah,
those
yeah,
people.
yeah.
But I think that you might be the first active, like, current pastor for the show. So, that
I'm
is
honored.
that is a
Thank you.
first.
Okay.
And to be fair, as like a queer person who has been actively harmed by pastors and religious leaders in the past, I got to admit I was actually like shitting myself for this episode. So it is
Mm,
going to be a really interesting episode because I think it's one that many people need to hear. I think
mhm.
it's really easy to think that like when your reference point is really shitty, abusive, harmful pastors and religious leaders, that's who you think everybody is. And it took me a number of years to open the pages of Unclobber for that reason. And then I did it
Wow.
and I was like, actually, he seems pretty all right. Hence, hence the episode.
We'll
Um,
see if that opinion maintains 40 minutes from now. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so growing up in that space, and I mean, in an Australian context, Baptist is a very like enormous spectrum for us. So,
Okay. Okay.
like we have like super duper fundamental. I just realized I like super duper a lot. Fundamental conservative Baptists, all the way
Uh-huh.
to like very progressive,
Oh, really? Okay.
open
Okay.
Baptists. So, what was life like as a kid growing up in a religious space for you and quite a heavy faith-based space?
Yeah, thanks for that contextualizing, Sam. Definitely in America, Baptist is generally synonymous with
Yeah.
conservative and
Yeah.
fundamental. The If there are communities that still have Baptist in their name and they are more liberal, open, progressive, they are certainly the exception that proves the rule. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, growing up, we weren't of the, to quote Sam, we weren't super duper fundamental insofar as we weren't the kind of family where it's like no dancing, no cards, no rock and roll music, right? You can certainly get to that end of the spectrum in many parts of our country for sure. But for us, it was a little more uh, tamped down conservatism insofar as uh, it was just purity culture was super big, although that really came up more post-Baptist because that was when we kind of found the generic evangelical world around my teenage years. That was when that influence became real heavy. But yeah, there was the expectation in our family that um, that all of us kids would come to accept Jesus Christ as our personal Lord and Savior, and that as a Baptist, the way that you do that is to say the sinner's prayer, which is
Mm-hmm.
you know, no one would ever call it this, but let's just call it what it is. It's viewed as a magical prayer that once you say it, it somehow secures your name on the Lamb's Book of Life, which therefore ensures that when you die, you go to heaven. Like
Mm-hmm.
that is essentially like what is taught and practiced for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And even though people would have their rejoinders and their explanations for why, well, it's not just that. It kind of is just that. That really was
Yeah.
the point. And for many people still is the point. Like you need to say some prayer where you acknowledge that you are a sinner,
Mm-hmm.
separated from God, but that you believe in your heart that Jesus died on the cross as payment for your sins,
Mm-hmm.
and that you believe that he rose from the dead. And then when you invite him into your heart, you're saved.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of that's the plan. That's the expectation. And I fulfilled that as a
Mhm.
5-year-old boy in the top bunk of the bunk beds, which I see now for those who,
Yeah.
most
Good.
people are listening to this, but behind me, those are not the actual bunk beds that I was saved in. Okay. I want to be clear. I don't think those bunk beds exist anymore, but there are currently bunk beds behind me where my kids sleep. Um,
I'm
yeah.
curious. I'm curious how you feel about like the pressure as a 5-year-old to do that, and now with context as a pastor and as a dad, and like I guess I'm obviously coming at that angle from an angle of like childhood development as well,
Yeah.
and like a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old ability to comprehend what we are asking them to comprehend. How
Yeah.
do you feel about that retrospectively?
Yeah. It's a great question. And there are a couple different layers to that. One of the things that you'll find with me, Sam, is that I, I, I try to be quick to understand those who are different from me.
Hmm.
And we can unpack that later if you want, like why that is. But it's a quick move for me to try and begin there. And so when I do that, especially in this context, I'm like, yeah, my parents were doing the best they could with what they had, right? And what was given to them
Yeah.
was a way of seeing the world, themselves, reality, God, existence
Mhm.
as this uh, as a setup where you are born into sin, right?
Yeah.
That was what their preconceived assumptions were about what it meant to be a human. And so for them, and this is true for many people, to know that your kid is born into a state of sin, and if they don't make some confession of faith before whatever the age of accountability is, which varies depending on which denomination you're in, um, then yeah, of course there's like that internal.
Mm.
I can understand the motivation behind wanting your child, quote unquote, to be saved.
Yeah.
Of course you would. Of course you would. You wouldn't want
Yeah.
to be eternally separated from your child. A- And then, as you pointed out, from a childhood development point of view, though,
Hmm.
that's a lot of pressure to put
Yes, it
on
is.
a child. Those are some
Yeah.
big stakes to
Hmm.
give to a young human who doesn't have the capacity to digest said steaks, right? If I can switch from metaphor to literal, like
Yeah.
I just did there, steaks, STAKES to STEAKS, which I don't know why I had to explain all that. Some people knew immediately what I meant. Others were like, what did he mean? Oh, that's what he meant. And now he's still talking about it.
Yeah.
Yes, now he's still talking about how he used steaks in two different ways. So those are some big stakes to hand to small children
Yeah.
uh, that, quite frankly, they have no business holding that much
Mm.
emotional, psychological weight. They just don't. They
Yeah.
just don't. I don't. So I understand why the church I went to growing up
Mm.
taught the way they taught, why the Sunday school teachers presented things the way they did, why my parents, I don't remember my parents putting pressure on me, right? It wasn't one of those things. But obviously I picked up from a very young age that this is something that I should probably do at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Do you remember it?
I, so, I mean, memory's weird, right?
Yeah.
how much do we remember things versus how much do we remember telling the story of the thing?
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, some people have a very vivid recollection of the time that they, quote unquote, got saved. And
yeah,
other people just have memories, like snippets of memories. I typically refer to like remembering and recalling as two different things, but
yeah, I love that.
yeah,
I I feel like I do remember
yeah.
the it being late at night. I'd already been tucked in bed. What I don't remember is if it was my mom or my dad. That's interesting, right? I
Hmm.
I, I feel like um it was only one of them because the other one, because another piece that I remember. So I remember it being at night. I remember already being tucked in. I remember calling down the hallway for one of the parental units to return, and me saying that I was ready to accept Jesus into my heart. And so whichever parent that was, walked me through that prayer.
Mm.
And then the reason why I can remember it was just a single prayer is because then either the next day or a few days later, that parent with the three kids drove to pick up my other parent from a church camp. So I don't know if it was my mom at a women's camp or my dad at a men's camp. So I don't really remember that part of it, but I remember then picking them up and like having like, good news to share with the other
Right.
parent that Colby got saved this weekend. So I do remember that, which is I would wager is probably only one of
Mm.
a handful of memories that I have from my childhood because it was pretty traumatic, pointing back to the whole parents' divorce and all that. So my memory's pretty
Yeah.
locked away under some layers of trauma from those early years. But I do have some memory of that. Yeah.
Hmm. I'm curious, as you got a bit older and through your teenage years, who was God to you? And like, how did you relate to them as a divine being as a young person?
Well, I noticed your divine pronoun of them, and I would say I did not relate to them, right? I related to him, right? You know what I
Yes.
mean? Clearly now I would speak differently, but that was certainly part of the tradition I grew up in, as God was male.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I had that uh I made that choice. Did I make that choice as a 5-year-old? Sure, yes and no. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. How much of that is cultural conditioning? How much of that is actually autonomy? It's some strange cocktail of both. Um, but then going to church, after that was really just a thing that we did. I wouldn't say I necessarily had any kind of connection to or relationship with like being a Christian was just something that I knew that I was, but it
Mm.
wasn't something I did per se outside of the obligatory attending with the familial expectations. And the reason why I put it that way is because the moment that everything changed for me was when I was entering my senior year of high school. So I was about 17 years old at this point,
Mm.
and I opted to go on a youth group event for a week down in the beaches of Southern California, where the goal of the week long event was to train high school students in the art of apologetics, which if people don't know what that is, that's like a fancy religious word that means how to prove that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
so so like they would train you in the morning. We go in these classrooms and they would train you in the morning. And again, the whole impetus was getting people to say this magical prayer, right? And so they would train us in how to like spin every conversation into get it like basically getting people to say this prayer. And then they would send us out in the afternoons, two by two, to go throughout the beaches of Southern California and just interrupt random people who've been, by the way, saving up money all year long to fly across the country to go to the world famous Huntington Beach. And then here comes two punk ass teenage kids that walk up and say, "Excuse me, sir, can I ask you a question?" And
Yeah.
that person should have said no. They should have just ran the other way. Like, no, I'm on vacation with my family. Screw off.
Yeah.
But these people are nice. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I was trained to ask, if you were to die right now, like, which is just a great way to start any conversation.
Hmm.
If you were to die right now, do you know where you would go? And the hope, as what is that they would say no, and then I could like lead them in a prayer of salvation, right? And so I get back to the room that I'm staying at that first afternoon going out, trying to save souls on the beach, which I saved 0 souls that day. I'm proud to report. Get back to the room that I'm staying at, and I lay down on the bed in the room, and I just start weeping. Start like sobbing, which was a super new experience for me. I mean, now in my life as a 42-year-old person who's been in therapy for a dozen years and all sorts of life, like I'm an easy cry at this point. But back then, I don't know that
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd really ever cried. Maybe I did. But like this was a new experience for me. And in that moment, Sam, I can remember God saying to me, not like in an audible sense, but in the kind where you're like, oh, there's someone speaking to me right now, and God's like, Colby, this is a chance for you to choose one of two paths for your life. You can
Mhm.
keep going on the path that you're on, where life's just all about you, and um, you just kind of do your own thing, whatever. Or you can make your life about something bigger and more meaningful and make it about me. And that was the framework of that I understood it at the time. And what I realized looking back on is the reason why I think I was so utterly broken that afternoon is because I had been exposed to be a kind of fraud out there on the beaches of Southern California. Like I was out there telling people have a relationship with God through Jesus when I really had no idea what that meant for myself.
Yeah.
Uh, and that sort of disintegration in my spirit broke me. And so that was the moment where I like really did choose to to use the language that would have used back then to give my life to God. That's when a couple days later at that conference I felt the calling on my life to go into ministry and become a pastor. And so that's a bit of the contrast of like I don't know that God meant much to me prior to that, other than just I knew that I was a Christian because I said the prayer.
Yeah. I'm curious at that moment where you're sort of being presented with two paths.
Mhm.
Why, I mean, aside from the obvious reasons as to why a lot of people become people of faith of any kind, but why was your path, where it was just about who you were as a human and as a person, why were you not enough in that moment?
Oh, well, I mean, if I look at it now with my understanding of capital R reality now, I certainly was enough, right? So I mean the framework that I was working with was flawed
Yeah.
in many regards. The framework I was working with was flawed. So the framework I was working with was no, I am a fallen, broken sinner.
Mm.
And sure, that might have gotten fixed by saying the prayer of salvation when I was 5 years old,
Mhm.
but I was basically playing pretend ever since then.
Yeah.
And I can so it's real interesting for me to reflect on this now. What are we talking? 35 years? No, sorry. Now my math sucked all of a sudden. 25 years later. I'm not that old. Good gravy. 25 years later, it's interesting to reflect on if I continue to believe that that was truly God speaking to me that afternoon, which I'm open to the suggestion that it wasn't, that it was all just convoluted in my head, right? Sure,
Mhm.
that's possible. Um, but if I continue to operate under the belief that it was God, whatever that might mean, communicating with me that day, I have no problem with a perception of the divine where God is kind of restricted to only be able to meet people where they were at,
Mhm.
where we're at, using a kind of language and framework that we currently understand. I mean, this we see this in Scripture constantly. I
Mhm.
mean, the whole trajectory of the Bible, one of the trajectories of the Bible is this unfolding revelation, and well, I shouldn't use that word. That's probably um, goes in a different direction. This unfolding awareness and expansion of comprehension into the divine. Like the earliest conceptions of who God was in the Old Testament are remarkably similar to how all the other gods of that time were, which was pretty violent and angry and tribal. I mean, the earliest Israelite people were just like everyone else on the planet, which is to say they were all polytheists. There was the assumption that, of course, everybody has their own God. This is why so much of the Old Testament is phrased as I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God is the most high God. You shall have no other gods before me. Right?
Hmm.
The assumption is, yeah, there's lots of gods,
Yeah.
but as Yahweh, I'd like to be the number one, you know?
Yeah.
So the original, so anyway, what I'm saying is if we are to, we can glean all sorts of things from scripture, but well, one of the things I think that is really clear is that there is this unfolding, this progressive awareness to where it paints a picture of a kind of God who meets people where they're at. And I know that was a really long way just to get back to where I started, but
Yeah.
I do think, Sam, that to answer your question, I was I was the materials I was given were kind of flawed to
Mm.
begin with, where I was told I wasn't enough. Clearly, I know now, and if I were to speak to 17-year-old kids, I'd be like, "You are enough." But in that moment, I think what God was working with was someone who saw, and this is true about me, that my life I was just focused on me. It was just all about me, me, me. Very egocentric, which is pretty typical for teenagers anyway,
17.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's not even there's not even that big of a deal there. But
Yeah.
there was the contrast for me was where did I want to point my life's aim? And I think it's okay. And this is where I look back and be like, this is why I can still, with some earnestness, say I think it was God. I think it's okay to say, yeah, there's a way to live life where you set your own interests as the aim, and that will lead to a kind of selfishness and ego-driven isolation, loneliness, etc. Or there's a way to set something else, something bigger, more true, more real, more noble, more beautiful. These are all different synonyms for God to set that as your aim, and that'll take you on a different kind of life path.
What was it like for you to, I guess, go on the path of becoming the fully fledged actual pastor? Because have met quite a few along this journey of like, that's where things can fall apart for a lot of people when they get to the point of like actually pulling apart, doctrine and scripture and interacting with other people who might be just as fundamental and as conservative as they are, but they might be a different kind of fundamental and a different kind of conservative that they were not raised with, right? So what was that like for you to sort of like start broadening the knowledge and the horizons of that space?
Yeah, two things. One, the broadening didn't come till my after I got my college experience of getting my degree in pastoral ministry, right? So first I had to decide I wanted to be a pastor, change plans from going into graphic design in college to then going into ministry and study to become a pastor. And so those 4 years um, wasn't a broadening yet. It was a narrowing. It was like a refining of the Baptist view of things. And in many ways, Sam, I thrived in that environment.
Mm.
Um, I I always did well in school, not because I'm smart necessarily, but because the modality of Western education works well for my temperament.
Yep.
I don't mind sitting in a classroom for hours on end, listening to lectures and taking notes, and I'm good at tests and I can write essays, right? So I thrive in that sort of learning environment. I also happen to fit a number of different check off different boxes for these are the kinds of things that we like in our leaders.
Mm.
You are male, check. You are straight, check.
Mhm.
You are you have the relative body type and physique and facial structures that in our time and place and culture map onto, oh, we like the way that looks. Check. So therefore you are now trustworthy just because
Yeah.
you have just because of how you were born, right? And then you add on to that like personality. You can be charming and people tend to like you. You have leadership qualities. You have communication skills, right? So I had all these things that just kind of worked in my favor.
Yeah, you're the
uh,
textbook pastor.
Yes, in many ways, just
Yeah.
sort of fit kind of the textbook pastor.
Hmm.
Now there's a cynical way to look at that, and then there's a charitable way to look at that, and it's probably some combination of the
Yeah.
of two, right? There's probably people that fit that mold that maybe in hindsight shouldn't have taken that career path or been given those roles. And there
Hmm.
might be some people out there that think that about me as well. I have no illusion that I have um, nailed my job as which is to say, done really well being a pastor in every context. Um, but I do think that it was a combination of, oh yeah, this career path works really well for me, and I'm good at it, and I like it, right? So those my time in college and then working at the first church after college was
Mm-hmm.
um, it was a good fit. It was a good fit for that system. It was a good fit for that world. But then when I started the broadening of the mind about a year or so after graduating college, that's when I started to become the new wine that did not fit in the old wineskin.
Yeah, yeah. Did you, before we get to that broadening, I want to ask, because I obviously don't know what, because you've mentioned you have siblings. I don't know what they do, but did you become the golden child by becoming the pastor?
Oh no, I just further cemented my status as golden
Right.
child.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I kind of had always been, right? Like it
Um,
just I was
Okay.
the middle child, but I often functioned as the oldest child in terms of like birth order kind of patterns and archetypes. Um and yeah, it, it was what it was. I was
Yeah.
successful in most every endeavor, and I just
Hmm.
was a kind of golden child in most efforts. So then sure, becoming a pastor in sort of the larger network of Martin family extension
Mm.
was certainly like, yeah, that makes sense. And now you're elevated even more, which has caused that then to unfortunately go the other direction as a result of
Yeah, I
leaving
mean, the
some.
reason I wanted to ask because I were like, oh, we can ask the comparison question a little bit later, I suspect, in
Yeah,
the conversation. But
yeah,
Um, I do want to ask as well, because you mentioned purity culture, and typically the people who I have on my show, purity culture really, really sucks for those people, women, queer people. And so what was purity culture like for straight white male, where it's not harmful, but is the least harmful in terms of
yeah.
communities.
Sure, sure, sure. Um, I like that you pointed that out. Certainly there's a reasonable argument to be made that someone like me would the least harmed out of that sort of system
Hmm.
for sure. Um, and I think even reflecting on my own story can attest to that because I can talk about the the years of sort of just internalized shame and discomfort with my body that I carried and still carry in some ways to this day.
Hmm.
And that's true, but I'm absolutely hyper aware of how then just scale that up, for for anyone who sort of as you begin to add on the layers of those who don't have the kinds of privileged identity markers that I do. Um, what was it like for me? I took it serious,
Hmm.
right? It was something that I'm like, okay, if that's how a Christian, if that's what it means to honor God with my life and my body, then
Yeah.
that's what I'll do. Um, and so I did the classic save myself for marriage sort of thing, but in good evangelical fashion, you found a way to do everything but, right? And you figure
A
out
workaround.
where's the line, that's where it is. All right, I'm gonna come right up next to that line because
Yeah.
I still want to I still want to get an A.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, it matched my approach to school, which is how much work do I have to do to get a 90% in this class? I don't need an A plus. I
Yeah.
just need an A. So what's the minimum required to still be successful at this, right? So I
Yeah.
took that even into that sort of purity culture. But yeah, um, but then I think where it really showed up was in the first decade or so with my first wife.
Mm.
First wife. I don't have a second wife. My previous wife, my former wife. I don't know. I'm still new and like, how do I
Your
talk about it?
OG wife.
I'm my OG. I've been divorced for like 2.5, almost 3 years now, and I still don't always know how to talk about like what's the word to use. Um, the mother of my children. Our first 10 years together, there was it was clunky. It
Yeah.
was clunky because we were just operating out roles that were handed to us
Mm.
about assumptions of what sex should look like and feel like, and neither one of us really had a clear grasp on on that we should think beyond that, let alone how to start to think beyond some of that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm still um I almost said I'm still working through some of the body shame stuff, but you know what's interesting, Sam, or at least it's interesting to me, is I, I'm not absolving evangelical slash purity culture of anything. That's uh, all the charges that they're guilty of
Mm-hmm.
are well deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to use like my own sort of my ex-wife and I did not raise our kids with any purity culture at all. Like we swung the if anything, we swung the pendulum too far the other way, right? Which is normal, I think, to do. But that didn't immediately, as I observed my children and have observed them grow up, that didn't solve
Mm.
issues with like body shame issue stuff. It just didn't.
Yeah.
So it did like removing that doesn't immediately have
Mhm.
people be comfortable in and with their bodies.
Yeah.
Um, like one example I might give is I growing up, uh, I always felt super uncomfortable taking my shirt off. Like I hated playing shirts and skins, basketball. Never felt comfortable in the locker room in high school. Just all of that just felt really foreign and uncomfortable to me, and I didn't like it. I tried to avoid it as much as possible. And I remember in my early years of parenting and starting to have kids, thinking, well, I bet that's because my dad wasn't around growing up, and so I didn't have like a male figure that modeled taking your shirt off in the summer because it's hot and I'm gonna go mow the yard now and I'm gonna be shirtless and it's fine. It's fine, right?
Yeah.
There's no bias. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna make sure when my kids are little, I'm gonna just be comfortable being shirtless and just body positivity and all that. And it didn't work the way that I thought it would work.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it didn't that alone wasn't a solve for then, oh, now all of my children have super uh, comfortability in their bodies. So, and there's obviously many other factors to that, but I do sometimes, at least in my own narrative, and I sometimes wonder about other people's narratives, if we, in our efforts to rightly critique and pull apart purity culture, if we maybe have other things that we sort of have been smuggled or lumped in there that
Mm.
maybe don't really have anything to do with purity culture, but we kind of attack them because that's a convenient container that
Mm.
makes sense to put it in.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I talk about purity culture with people, and particularly when I'm unpacking purity culture in therapy, I go, we've got to look at the ideology behind purity culture, not just all of the facets of it. And the ideology behind purity culture is patriarchy and control. And we see that in like literally every part of society. It's
Mm,
not religion specific. There is, you know, condition like secular conditioning around body image and sex and shame and relationships and all of that sort of thing, they're all stemming from one place typically. So
mm, yeah,
it's unpacking, I guess, the ideology that fueled that purity culture timeline
that's
that
good. That's
about.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the some of the things you mentioned are like the stanky ingredients that purity culture like built a cake using some of these stanky ingredients. And if we
Yeah.
just attack the cake as like the problem, then we're missing out on the fact that, well, those ingredients are often used in other things too, and are
Yeah.
negatively affecting other baked goods.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's
It's
good.
like really early in the morning and I have not had breakfast and now I'm hungry.
Uh-oh, I just made you hungry. I just made you hungry. What's your typical breakfast routine? Do you have one?
No, I'm not usually, but it's the one thing that I have kept from like the Easter weekend is hot cross buns. So we have hot cross buns sitting in our kitchen, so that's what I will probably
How
anyway.
exciting.
Um, okay, so kickstart the conversation wherever you feel like it is necessary to start in terms of the biggest thing that I did not know about your story when I read Unclobber was that usually when I talk to pastors or ex-pastors or parents who have gone from non-affirming to affirming or anywhere in that space, it's usually because of someone, right? There's usually a relationship or a child or a friend or someone in their life who has come out and they've gone, oh shit, I need to rethink my
Mhm.
theology and my beliefs around this. That was not the case for you, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I would consider that fairly rare, I imagine. And so why was this important for you
yeah,
to look at and to unpack and to go, this is not okay?
yeah. Real quick though, can I say something real quick
Yeah.
to like you just beautifully described what is, I affirm, your experience. Uh, what is the dominant narrative, the most common story,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is exactly what you laid out, where people reevaluate their thinking on a particular matter because they are met with someone in a relationship that sort of forces them to rethink that. What I want to say about that is I have found in my work that sometimes can get minimized or dismissed by non-affirming Christians. And what they'll say is, "Oh, you only became affirming because your child came out." And so they're like dismissing that as their path. And what I want to say to them oftentimes is, yeah, what did you want them to do? Like, and obviously I know what they wanted them to do, which was
Yeah.
to shame their child and sort of try to, obviously we know what that looks like. But the fact that people's experience when that is what they do gets dismissed as though they should have done something different, for me is such a tragedy. Like for those out there who their response to their child or their brother or their sister or their aunt or their co or whatever was to be like, oh, this person whom I know, and I know they're a gracious, kind, beautiful human, right? When you read sometimes Romans chapter 1, and which is often seen as one of Paul's opinions about homosexuality, and it's not. But when you read that, you read about people who have turned their back on God, and God's given them over to the due penalty of their error, and people who have worshiped the created instead of the creator. And you just read about these humans who the description is appalling, and you're like, but that doesn't fit my neighbor Deb. Like I know Deb,
Yeah.
and that's not Deb. And just because Deb told me she's a lesbian, like so you know what I mean. So people, this is what we want people to do. Is we want people to be changed when they are met with other people's stories. So it's a beautiful move of empathy and understanding and compassion. So I just wanted to say
Yeah.
to anyone, if they've ever had their story dismissed or cast aside because someone says, "Well, you only change your mind because of," it's like, yeah, that's exactly what you would want a parent to do in that situation. Okay, so your question to me was like, I guess I would answer it by this, similar to how I said um, that I was well mapped for being a kind of pastor, and I was well mapped for being a good student. And if this is what a good Christian does in the world of purity culture, then that's what I'll do. For me, ultimately, when I look at what caused me to reevaluate my position on the clobber passages, it was rooted from the same place, which is if I'm going to say that I believe a thing, I damn well better know what I actually believe about a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to audit and to examine the Bible and homosexuality was me seeking theological integrity.
Mm-hmm.
because this was a topic that prior to when I started to study it, I had never given it much thought. I just always started taking the party line, or I'd sort of read through 1 Corinthians 6 9, or read through Romans 1 26 27. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, I guess homosexuality is a sin and it's not God's design. Okay, moving on, right? Just never given it much of a thought. Uh, and then I can remember shortly after college, I was working at a church and I was trying to get licensed in the denomination so that I could be an official pastor to marry and bury people. And the final step in that process was to go through an interview with like a panel of seasoned ministers. And
Mm-hmm.
during my lunch break one afternoon, I'm walking through the church lobby and I'm studying the policies and procedures manual for the denomination. Just
Mm-hmm.
absolutely riveting uh, reading if anybody out there is interested. And so I'll never forget this, Sam. I'm reading this policies and procedures, and I get to this line that says, practicing homosexuals cannot be members of the church. And I remember thinking, practicing, but what if they're like really good at it? Okay, no, that's not what I thought, but practicing homosexuals. I remember thinking, okay, I get it insofar as the theology and the doctrine. So my head understood, yeah, being gay is a sin, et cetera, et cetera. But suddenly I noticed that my heart was not in the same place that my head was, meaning I could not comprehend that like that was the natural outcome of that kind of theology. Like,
Yeah.
sure, 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 they're being gay is a sin, but that's how we treat them. They can't be members of a church. Wait a minute. And then I kept reading about how they couldn't be elders, they couldn't be pastors, they couldn't work in children's ministry. And I just got this growing sense of disconnect between my head and my heart, is how I talk about it in Unclobber. And that was the first time that I noticed that there was a disconnect. And so that sense of my head and my heart being out of alignment, it hung with me for the next couple years. It wasn't something like I wish I could say. And then immediately after my lunch break, I went to my office and started studying the Clobber passages. No, it wasn't. It's just not how it went. It wasn't until a couple years later, and to this day, I can't really remember what ultimately pushed me to like revisit the topic. But there was something that happened around 2009 or 10 where I gave myself permission. I'm like, all right, I have sat with this lack of alignment for a couple years now. It's time to do something about it. And I didn't know going into the study of the Clobber passages where it was going to land, right? I didn't know. I was open to the possibility that my head would remain convinced in the historical position, and then I'd be like, "Sorry, heart, I know it sucks, but you got to find a way to get on board." Which I do think, and I'd be curious from actually your thoughts on this. That move of keeping the head here and then forcing the heart to kind of get in line with it. I think that's often what is behind the uh, the saying "love the sinner, hate the sin,"
Mm-hmm.
which is super problematic in its own right. But I think
Yeah.
what that's articulating is people who they know there's not an alignment there. It
Mm.
doesn't feel good for them to live out this really crappy belief, but they're committed to the crappy belief, so they find a way to like force my heart into it. Um, so I didn't know if that's where it was going to go, or spoiler alert for those who haven't read Unclobber. um, it turned out that that when I put these, and if people don't know, by the way, the term clobber passage is a term that was given to the 6 verses in the Bible that historically have been misused. I say misused to justify discrimination against primarily gay and lesbian people. Been used to clobber them in the past, right? That's where that comes from.
Mm.
And so I put all of my training into the study of these, right? Which is to say, put them in their historical context, their literary context, their cultural context. Try to understand the original language and the original intent of the author and how the original audience would have understood it. All the tools of my trade I put into these. And after a pretty exhaustive and extensive time of pouring myself into this subject, I came out on the other side being, well, we've got this wrong. The church has gotten this topic wrong. The Bible does not say what we've always been told that it says. So fortunately, my heart was the one that got to remain fixed that my head was the one that moved.
Yeah. I imagine you sort of said spoiler for those who haven't read the book, but I am imagining that unless they're a first-time listener, I can't imagine that they're going to think that as a queer host and person, I'm going to have a non-affirming pastor on my
Surprise! All of a
podcast.
sudden, 40 minutes into the
Um,
episode, and now this is why you are a sinner. Let us begin.
um, but I guess, I mean, as you're sort of talking about that head and heart situation, I'm sort of just going like, that's just like cognitive dissonance, right? Is like something is not lining up here. Like I feel this and I'm feeling this, and cognitive dissonance is not exclusive to queer people. Obviously, we experience it quite like there is always like a head and heart separation, even in that process as well. Particularly if you grow up in that space where you are told that the clobber passages are, you know, the right way to live. Um, and so I guess the reason that I ask that is because anytime somebody tries to find alignment where there is cognitive dissonance, that likely comes with a cost. And typically, in the situation where I sort of mentioned, if there is a family member or a loved one or something like that, it's easy for those people to go, it's worth the cost that it might in terms of what I might lose as a result of having this stance. And I know because I have read Unclobber, it did cost you as well. And so I guess I want to know why it was worth the cost for you as somebody who didn't really have a stake in the game.
Yeah. And the cost that Sam is referring to is that um, within a couple months after internally coming to the conclusion that we'd gotten this topic wrong, and so becoming personally an affirming Christian, within a couple months after that, maybe a year, I don't know what the timeline was exactly, but so I do remember it was September 21st, 2011, when President Barack Obama
Mhm.
um, signed the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was the American ban against gay service members. And so I posted to my Facebook that night, real smart, like just brilliant move. If you're gonna make any sort of opinion, go to Facebook to do it.
I mean, to be
But
fair,
I
as I read it, I was like, oh, that's not going to go well, Colby. Why?
listen, there's again, hindsight is you have really acute vision. You can see things real clearly in hindsight, but at the time it was a little bit, well, it was a lot naive. I don't know. There's a lot of things going on there, right? So
Yeah.
in the moment, um, I I there was a part of me, and I don't know how big this part was, but the part that led me to post on Facebook, which I did, I posted on Facebook that night, just a link to an article announcing the repeal, and I put 6 words. I put, "I'm glad this day finally came."
Yeah.
So there's a part of me that thought that that would be a shared sentiment within the larger Christian community, certainly within the church that I was working at. Now, where the naivete is, or maybe just straight up ignorance, is that I was working in a very conservative city at a very conservative evangelical megachurch
Mm.
that clearly stood on the side of non-affirming. Not that the church ever talked about it. The church really practiced don't ask, don't tell. Like there was no policy about how I'm sure now they force their pastors and staff to sign statements of affirming
Yeah.
traditional views on marriage and whatnot, but back then that did not exist at all.
Mm.
Um, but it was just sort of assumed and implied, like most evangelicals back in that day, like, yeah, of course you're against homosexuality and same-sex marriage. Uh, but also our church was really committed to this idea that within the kingdom of God, there's no room for discrimination.
Mm.
Now, again, it's not that I would have thought that we would have included gay people into that, but just this, for me, don't ask, don't tell. And this goes back to my kind of ignorance on what the policy was and what it stood for and how much it represented. I just kind of thought, oh, that's a discriminatory practice. And that's
Hmm.
about as far as I thought about it.
Yeah.
And so my celebration of it ending was just like, this is cool. This thing that used to like be discrimination is no longer existing. And that's
Hmm.
great. Um, what I was sort of naive about was how it was like a dog whistle to the church that, wow, something's up with Pastor Colby. Like clearly that was me tipping my hat to that I felt differently now about the topic of queer people. Um, but I also do think, as I look back on it years now with some reflection, I can I'm open to the possibility that there was an internal part of me that was kind of like sabotaging, like again, I'd found myself out of alignment once again, right? So you have the 17-year-old Colby who was a fraud pretending to be a Christian, but he wasn't, and that cracked his spirit and made him weep on a bed. There was the lack of alignment with my head and my heart on this topic. And then once I got that lined up, but now I was in a new state of not alignment, which was my internal convictions and my external reality were not in alignment. And I do think that it's possible that there was a part of me, there was a part of like this internal soul that was like, bro, we can't keep going like this. So like we're gonna we're gonna maybe help move this story along a little bit. Um, I don't know. It certainly wasn't conscious, but I'm open to the Freudian suggestion that the unconscious was maybe working the keyboard that night a little more than I was aware of. And so what happened then is that led to an emergency board meeting a couple days after that Facebook post, where I came out of the theological closet to the elders of the church, and then
Yeah.
2 days later they handed me my letter of termination effective immediately. And so that was the cost that you referenced a few moments ago, is that lost my job, lost our home, lost our community, lost, I haven't dug out of the financial hole in 12 years since that happened, or however long ago it's been. So it's not that I was unaware of the cost. I was very certain that going into that meeting, if I told those guys the truth, that it would cost me my job.
Mhm.
This is when I go back to, though, like that call from God to the 17-year-old version of me to put out in front of me as my North Star, living for something greater,
Mhm.
um, truth, goodness, beauty, peace, joy, hope. Like I take that shit seriously.
Mm.
And I take Jesus's teaching seriously. And when he says things like, what does it profit a person to gain the world but forfeit their soul?
Mm.
Like that means something to me. What good would it have done me, Sam, to kind of soft pedal or even lie my way through that meeting just to keep my job? Like my soul would have withered.
Mm.
And that is not a life. That's not a life I want. It's not a life I don't think anybody should want.
Mm.
This is part of why I do the work I do now, is because there's so many queer people out there that are having to make similar kinds of calculations, and it's tragic how many people have to continue to live in a state of shame or being in the closet, and their souls are just withering, and why I also can be so scathing towards pastors who I know themselves are affirming, and yet they keep chasing that paycheck and they keep chasing that larger church. But for me, just I did not want to live that life. Like I don't know, I take it seriously to be a person of integrity and live out my values.
Mm.
And I yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to say it other than that. Like for me, it really wasn't an option. Like I could not imagine a version of me going into that meeting saying anything other than the full truth.
Mm. You sort of alluded to it a little earlier, which is what impact did it have on your family and your relationships with like your immediate family, but also extended family, parents and things like that.
Yeah, a few years prior to changing my mind on the topic of inclusion is when I really started auditing a lot of my evangelical heritage. And so by the time I reached the topic of queer inclusion, I'd already kind of rethought a lot of my thoughts on things like the inerrancy of scripture or hell as an eternal conscious torment for people who didn't have that magic ticket to heaven. So there were some other things that I already kind of worked through, and along that journey had stirred up a lot of fear
Mm.
within some of my family members as I was distancing myself, certainly from the Baptist world, and even more so from the evangelical world. Um, so by the time I became affirming, though, there were some family members that had come along with or had traveled a similar journey. Whether or not I played a part in that, I don't know. They'd have to tell you that on their own time. So getting fired for being affirming of queer people in 2011, I would say within my immediate family, mostly was met with support and encouragement and love. I did have a few people who saw me as a heretic and a false prophet, and certainly they weren't happy that I was going through a real painful time. But in their mind, they're like, but also, yeah, that's of course you got fired for that because you're a false prophet. Um, and some of that still exists within my larger family. Uh, but yeah, even with those, kind of since my divorce, I don't know. I've just drifted farther and farther from a lot of my family, which is sad. I say it while I'm laughing. It's not funny, but this is how I deal with the discomfort as I laugh through it. So yeah,
Oh,
I don't know. I think for some of my family, I'm still kind of the black sheep. I went from the golden child to the black sheep, and
yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Mm. I mean, I've got to ask because I was thinking it while I was reading the book, which is, um, why stay a pastor?
Yeah, you're not wrong. That's a completely reasonable question to ask. Yeah, I've been given multiple off ramps
Mm.
over the years to like get out of the game and compelling reasons why. Like,
Mm.
no, seriously, there is a Starbucks at this exit and you've had to pee for 37 minutes. Like, take the exit, bro. Um, why did I say that? I don't know. You can edit that out if you want. Also, don't care if you don't. But yes, lots of off ramps have been given to me for getting out of this game. But I don't know, Sam. I go back to that. And there were certainly times where I remember when I did get fired thinking, oh, maybe I was wrong
Mm.
at that as a 17-year-old. Maybe I misunderstood God because at that time I couldn't see how I could be a pastor and affirming.
Mm.
Like I hadn't yet my world hadn't expanded enough to know that there were traditions and denominations and communities out there that could hold both of these things in tandem. And certainly now I do know, and I've been doing that for the last 12 years. But at that time, I was like, oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this isn't what God called me to. But at the end of the day, why am I still a pastor? I can't escape this sense that being a human is really freaking hard. Existing is really hard.
Mhm.
It's full of suffering and loneliness and pain and chaos and confusion. Um, and yet, there are some ways to approach life that seem to provide a kind of resilience, stability, security, peace.
Mhm.
If I can even quote Paul, a peace that like doesn't make sense, it surpasses understanding. Like in the midst of this constantly changing, full of disappointment existence that we call life, there is a way to go through it where we can be grounded in a deeper truth that we are okay,
Mhm.
that we are actually more than okay. We are loved. We are love. And for me, one of the consistent paths that I've found to that kind of way of being a human is through the life and the teachings of Jesus.
Mhm.
Um, and so, because that has been such a powerful, stabilizing, transformative component of my own life, um, I choose to continue to throw myself in that direction.
Mm.
And believe that there is value and meaning and purpose and goodness in helping in whatever way I can others also find a kind of stability and security and grounding and meaning and purpose in their life. So, to the extent that I can be used to help remove shame and replace it with love for people, I just keep saying, here I am. Like, I can't think of
Mm.
I can't think of a better way to spend this one life that I got.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a double-barreled question, which I've realized over time is kind of my thing, but
As long as it's not a super duper double
no.
barrel question. I can't handle that, but just a regular double barrel.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't actually remember whether you talked about this towards the end of the book or not, but I know, or I'm sort of assuming in some way that um, simultaneously you have probably met queer people who are both, um, on one hand, terrified of you because you are like, I guess, the manifestation of people who have significantly harmed them, but also there might be another group of people where you are the first queer affirming, potentially safer pastor that they have come across. And what is it like for you to be both of those things for people?
Yeah. Well, to be the latter is is a gift that I
Mm.
do not take for granted ever. Like it is just is the deepest joy of my life to be able to be to fill that space, which we'll talk more about in a second. To the former, what's it like to be that? Totally understandable, right? And I think I can say this with full honesty, that there's zero part of me that would ever want to convince anyone that no, 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 I'm one of the good ones. Like it's okay, let down your guard for me. You can trust me. Like
Yeah.
no, if someone wants nothing to do with me or my work or anything that I have to offer, because I represent and look like and reflect and remind them or trigger them of all, yeah, totally get it.
Yeah.
Great. Let me Well, I was gonna say, let me offer you multiple other resources that might be helpful, but they might not even take that, which again is fine. Like
Yeah.
I don't begrudge that, is my point. You know what I mean? Like I just say that makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally cool. Um, but to go back to then what's like to the other, this is, and I didn't say anything about this in Unclobber because the first edition because I hadn't experienced it yet. But if anybody has the second edition,
What I read.
there's an afterward where I
Mm.
have a section about what it's like reflecting on now
Mm.
the book having been out for like 8 years at that point or whatever.
Mm.
And that was when I got I didn't expect, or I'll say it like this. What I'm about to tell you as like the most common feedback that I get from the book is not at all what I thought. I didn't even expect it at all, let
Yeah.
alone it being like number one, top of the Family Feud board list, like the thing that I hear more than anything else, which is precisely what you just said. A queer person who says to me some version of the following. They say, Colby, I need to tell you that your book has the reason why it's meant so much to me is because you are a straight
Mm.
male pastor.
Hmm.
And they'll say, I've read so many other books by gay and lesbian authors, and they're great. This is what they say. They're great, but I can't help as I'm reading them get it out of the back of my mind that like, yeah, but you're just saying this to sort of justify yourself or whatever. And they say, but your work, because it comes at it with this having no dog in the fight, like what it does, Sam, is it is what I've discovered is that people tell me is that it lands differently for them in their heart and their mind and their body, that it allows these things to land in a different way. And I think, um, and you can certainly speak to this better than I can, but part of why talk therapy works when it works for people is when you're sharing with your therapist some of the past trauma that you've been through, and as you're telling the stories you're reactivating your nervous system, you're putting your body back in that sort of activated space.
Hmm.
But ideally your therapist reflects back to you
Mm.
compassion, non-judgment, loving kindness. And so
Mhm.
the brain actually gets to wire new pathways to connect a new emotional experience to these stories,
Mhm.
so that that's kind of how the healing from our past trauma begins to happen. And I think there's something about hearing the same kind of person, straight white dude, who sort of put the harm in the hearts of queer people, having that same person like replace it with love and compassion, has been really powerful. Not for everybody. Again, not for everybody. There are those for whom that's absolutely not their experience. But I have been overwhelmed with how often I hear that from people, and I just, what a gift! What an absolute gift to be able to be that and do that for people.
Yeah. And I think also for, for people who are listening, particularly for queer people who are listening, who have not read your book for a various number of reasons, because it might trigger them in any way, that can also like give that permission to evolve over time. Because, like I said, I only just read Unclobber this year because
Yeah.
it was not a book that I was fair touching with a 10-foot pole, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Only because I was like, I'm not listening to another straight white male for guidance and for support and for like knowledge, despite the fact that my own therapist is a straight white male, but like that's beside the point. But it was like, I guess I say that to sort of say like give yourself permission for that to evolve as well over time. And
Mm.
it is yeah, I mean, the book is full of like biblical language, obviously. It is not the type of book that I thought it was going into it. And so I think I would also stress that. And there's a lot of humanness in what is a theological book as well. And I think that's what I appreciated about Unclobber is that, yeah, you didn't have a stake in the game, and yet you did it anyway, and it cost you. And it probably cost you in ways that you don't share publicly and that you don't write in the book, I imagine, because that's my therapist brain going online. Um, but you could have just been like every other pastor, which is why I asked why was it worth it type of question, because you could have been like, a significant number of other pastors and not done the work or just continued to keep it quiet and not share that. But you didn't. And the thing about allyship is that we need it, and we don't want to put it all on queer people to do that advocacy. Um, I am curious about the extended edition and why it was important for you to acknowledge, because as I was reading on Clobber, I was like, there's something missing here, which is that the harm that these passages, whilst not, exclusively, can still do to trans, non-binary, and gender diverse folk, and why it was
Yeah.
important for you years later to go, oh, this needs to go in, this needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah. I think it's reasonable to say that certainly back in 2011, when I, or 2010 when I changed my mind on this, 2011 when I got fired, 2012 when I first started writing blogs about this and Facebook articles about this. Um, and then when I wrote the manuscript in 2015, even at that time, and maybe I'm more speaking from an American context,
Mm,
the uh, the conversation around transgender people had just not reached
mm,
much of a critical mass tipping point yet. It just wasn't. It was in the water,
mm,
right? But it really wasn't something that was, certainly compared to what it is today, right? So there was and so that's one response, is it just really wasn't
mm,
on as many people's radars, myself included. Two, I did want to keep the scope very narrow, and that was a decision that me and the editor made, which is why I don't talk about Adam and Eve. I don't talk about, Genesis and fall of creation. Like, there's a lot of things I don't talk about. Which, fun fact, that'll be in book number 3 coming out next year. Um, and didn't so I really kept the scope very narrow, which is Bible and homosexuality, like just the clobber passages. What are the things that have been used that seem to talk about sex acts? So I had to have a narrow scope, right? So there, There just
Mhm.
wasn't. We had to pick and choose what to address with that. But by time the second edition came out, we had, as a culture, like moved. We had broadened the conversation to include far more aspects of the LGBTQ panoply, right? So non-binary and intersex and transgender, um, and so that's certainly, even though the scope of the book remains unchanged because it wasn't a rewrite of the book. It was a minor edits and changes and study guide and an afterword. Um, it still felt like, okay, I do want to name and acknowledge that if someone goes in, because of, I think today now they would, and maybe this is what your experience was, is you would go into that being like, cool, this author is about LGBTQ inclusion, therefore I would assume there would be stuff in here about the T of the LGBTQ, and largely there isn't, right?
Yeah.
And so there can be that, wait, what? And I just want to say, keep in mind that it was written in 2015, and it was just different back then.
Yeah.
Um, and then, but what I did want to make sure that I do between the first edition and the second edition, and this happened, and I tell this story in the afterword, is there was a gentleman that came to our church for a while, and he was an intersex transgender man. And he came up to me after a sermon one Sunday, and he said, "Hey, Colby, can I talk to you?" Which is, pastors always love when people want to talk to them right after church on Sunday. It's just the best time. And but I like this guy, and I always valued his feedback. And he's made the observation. He said, "You often say in your prayers or when you're preaching, you talk about brothers and sisters or sons and daughters of God." And he said, "I just want you to know that I don't really hear myself in that, and I
Mm.
just want to offer you a pretty simple." Switch if you wanted to say children of God instead of sons and daughters of God, or siblings instead of brothers and sisters. And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Totally easy. Like, and from that point on, whenever I wrote, and it took me a while to try to change how I speak, and I think for the most part, the change has been complete. But so then when it came for the second edition, I went and I found all of the instances in the manuscript where I said sons and daughters, and I swapped it out for children, and I found brothers and sisters, and I swapped it out for siblings, because yeah, I was like, okay, time to update that and be more inclusive even in how we talk about those things.
Mm. Anytime I have someone on this podcast, there is always elements of pain and grief and loss and throughout typically their story of, navigating all of the scope of life. But what has healing looked like for you? Because there has been loss, there has been pain, there has been, you know, some harm done. What has healing looked like for you?
I think the way that I'll answer that right now, uh, healing has looked like a, I'm going to say a beginning of, because I'm by no means there,
Mm,
but a beginning of the probably the rest of my lifelong project of trusting that I'm okay.
mm,
Healing has looked for me like l- l- trying to notice in the language I use, because I can't say that I believe it yet, but I'm actively trying to believe that I am worthy of love.
mm,
I spent much of my life not just being told from a religious perspective that I wasn't worthy, but then from
mm,
my own way that I was raised from my parents and sort of treated by my parental units, who were doing the best that they could, but still had some pretty nasty effects on me. Um, just was ended up believing that I wasn't really worthy uh, of love um, and so healing for me has looked like, no, I am okay, meaning like with God, with the universe, with self, like I'm okay.
mm.
There's
Yeah.
nothing I can do to change that. I am okay because of course I'm okay because I've always been okay. All right, that's my mantra. And then secondly, and related to that, is believing that I actually am worthy of love, and that's an okay thing to say out loud. That's what healing
Yeah.
continues to look like for me.
Mm. Before I get to what is my final question in every episode, being a person of faith and again, the straight white male and an American, how you doing over there? Because it's a bit of a shitstorm in the US at the moment, and we are
Yeah.
looking at that and we're going like, how are you dealing with that? Not just on like how are you dealing with that as a pastor, but how are you dealing with that as just a human who sees value in people?
Yeah, it's an embarrassing time to be an American. Um, there's no doubt about it. I still can't fully wrap my head around the fact that in 2016 we elected a failed businessman, uh, reality TV show
Mm.
person into the highest office in the land. Especially the whiplash of seeing how many evangelical Christians supported it. It's like, wait a minute, that's the exact representation of everything that you told us not to be like growing up.
Yeah.
How in the world did you just suddenly
Mm.
let go of all that? So there's certainly that. And then absolutely as it relates to our LGBTQ siblings over here, like it's a scary time. I mean, I've got dear friends who are trans who are like actively pursuing how to move to a different country because it's and that's not just like posting on Instagram like, oh, moving to Canada. This is like, no, flying to that country, visiting, scoping out cities to raise their family and sort of thing. Yeah, the number of legislation efforts right now that are seeking to undo gains that have been hard fought is not great. It's not great. How am I doing? Obviously, we could and I should name the privilege of being able to not be directly affected by a lot of that. But I think even before that, and this is kind of what comes up for me when you ask that question, even before that, I remember the very specifically the day after our 2020 elections when Biden won and Trump was no longer president. I remember my nervous system for the first time in 4 years just feeling a little more chill. Like, wait a minute, just not having that person
Yeah.
flood every single channel of our media, um, like, oh man, there's a sense of like, it felt like normalcy was restored. Now that's not, whatever. I'll just leave it there. And so what I've tried to practice over the subsequent 4 years is I realized, oh, my deep involvement and engagement and awareness, and this, sometimes we buy into this narrative that we have to be informed.
Mm.
Do you? Do we? I don't know. We certainly are not creatures that have evolved. We are maladapted to our environment.
Mm.
This is 100% true. We are our our ancestors evolved over the course of millions and then hundreds of thousands of years to essentially be able to exist within a community of maybe 200 people. Like that's about as many relationships as we can handle and stories that we could know.
Mm.
And now we we know far too many things. Our bodies and brains and systems are just not
Mm.
built to hold this much. We're just not. We're so maladapted to our current society. It'd be laughable if it wasn't so tragic.
Mm.
So I had to completely reorient during the 4 Biden years, my relationship to news and what I was consuming. And I have brought a lot of those practices with me into this second Trump administration, which is I'm going to put my head down and do my work, do my ministry, focus on the people that I love and I know and I care about, focus on what I'm doing. And to the extent that I can, really just not open up the floodgates to the madness and the chaos because that is never ending. It is never ending, and it seems to only people. eh, eh, I'm not sure I totally believe in what I'm about to say, but I think sometimes people convince themselves that they have to be informed because that's what activates them to move for change. And I'm like, I don't know if that's true. I feel
Mm.
like you can be motivated from a place of wanting to bring change into the world without also like opening up the spigot to the constant
Mm.
crap that comes out of literally every orifice of media these days.
Yeah.
So part of how I'm doing is I'm like, I I let myself be not informed all the time,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
I focus on my work and my ministry and the people that I love and care about.
Mm. I think also no matter how much information we have, if you don't have values that align with advocacy and justice, then the information is just information unless you have something within you that drives
Yes.
you to do something with that
That
information.
you
So,
just said it better. Yep, I agree. Cosign.
okay, I like to finish these episodes with some encouragement for people. And I think that you are probably in one of the most, other than probably other therapists that I've had on the podcast, you are probably in a unique position in that you actually probably come across a lot of people who are very fresh in unpacking or fresh in deconstructing or anything in that scope. And so, what would you say to that person who is just listening to this episode and they are knee deep in the thick of it at the moment?
Be kind to yourself. Truly, truly, truly be kind to yourself. And that can look like a number of ways. One of the ways that can look like is if you if you feel like you need to not pick up a Bible,
Mm.
not go to church, don't.
Yeah.
Like it's okay. You have all the permission in the world. Like
Mm.
none of you to go back to my what I said a few minutes ago about what my healing has looked like to know that I'm okay. That's not just unique to Colby. That is like you listener, the person who currently is experiencing the sound waves of my voice rattling off the interior of your eardrum, you too are also okay. And you will always be okay. Like you are a beloved child of God simply by the fact that you exist, right? There's nothing you can do to earn that good news, and there's nothing you can do to lose that even better news. And even if you hearing that, you're like, yeah, but there's no God by which I can be a beloved child of. That's fine too. I don't even. That's fine. You can ignore that too, and you don't have to believe me at all. But to the extent that there might be something in these words of me saying that you're okay, that you are loved, that you can take all the break. Don't even frame it as a break because that assumes you're going to come back. I literally have zero vested interest in you being Christian
Mhm.
or no. Being a Christian because I'm trying to do a lot of work right now to separate the identity of
Mhm.
being a Christian versus being Christian. I
Mhm.
actually really like when people are Christian, which means they live their life with values of mercy and kindness and forgiveness and peace. And whether they call it Christian or not, I don't really care. But like, I think people like being Christian matters to me a lot, which is just to say, be a person of love and peace and kindness. Um, but yeah, you can take all the break that you need. Don't even think of it as a break. You can just have full permission to take space from the things that have brought you pain. Like, of course you would. Why wouldn't you? And then if you ever feel like you want to start um, re integrating with those parts of yourself, or if you ever feel like you want to re-explore, just know that there does exist ways to think about God, to think about Jesus, to think about the Bible, to think about the religion of Christianity. There are ways to think about these things that are very compatible, and I would argue with that maybe even mapped on really well to a path for human flourishing and wholeness. That those paths do exist, and I know that for many people those seem divergent paths because of course they would think that way. Um, but a lot of us have found and discovered and are discovering that there is a way to walk this path of being Christian that does actually lead to healing and wholeness and abundance. And if and when people are ready to explore that, there are more and more resources out there that are helpful, that are helping people find that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining me.
Hmm.
It has been, like I said earlier on in the episode, I was a little anxious for this episode for a variety of reasons. But in the same way that you sort of said about the moment that your nervous system relaxed, there was a moment for me where I was like, oh, he's not like the rest of them. That is good. Even though I had read the book, it's one
Yeah.
thing to go from text to real life. And so I appreciate your time and I appreciate you joining me. But I also appreciate what you are doing for people who want to retain their faith and not feel like they need to carve a core part of their identity out of themselves. And so, what your role is for queer people of faith extends far beyond that. And so, I appreciate that, despite the fact that I might not be that anymore. Um, it once upon a time was something that I did want to be, and at the time I didn't think it was possible. So I love that there are people telling others that it is possible, and so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Sam. It's been great to meet you and to share this space with you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.